Hello and welcome. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Really good. Great to
That's
meet you.
good. Yeah, you as well. We're happy to have you here. Just for everybody watching, we'll go ahead and do some introductions. What is your name, pronouns, and any identities that you would like to share?
Okay, so I am Kellan and I go by they, them pronouns. And I'm a transmasculine, non-binary, trans, I've already said trans, and I'm also a transracial adoptee. So I was adopted from China to England when I was younger. So yeah, I'm a person of colour as well.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about your journey as a trans non-binary and intercountry adoptee? So that's a very
Yeah,
interesting
sure.
intersectionality,
It's quite a niche one, I feel.
very niche.
So first off, I actually didn't realize that I was a person of color until a few years ago, and I think it was when kind of the Black Lives Matter movement was kind of more prominent in lockdown, and it was only then that I actually realized that I wasn't a white person, just because I didn't have dark skin. And, being raised in whiteness, I think I've had so much kind of deconditioning and unlearning to do with kind of colonial like mindsets. Um, and I think growing up, I, I was very, as an adoptee, I think I was definitely working through that feeling of having to be the basically daughter that my parents went and adopted, and feeling so much fear for kind of being able to even explore my authentic self. So it took me a while as well to figure out my queerness. And I grew up kind of believing that queerness was a sin because my parents were also quite conservative and religious when I was younger. So it wasn't till about I was probably age 14ish that I realized that being gay wasn't, in quotations, like perverted and a choice that people made. And I was like, oh, this really throws my life views completely askew. And I think shortly after I kind of realized that I liked females, and came out to some friends, I started realizing that transness was actually a thing, because I think before that I just had no exposure, and didn't even realize it was a possibility. So I guess I'd always known how I'd felt inside, and that I'd kind of always related to typically more masculine things, like lacking more masculine things. Um, but it wasn't until I kind of saw YouTubers that were trans men, I was like, oh, I think I relate a little bit too much to these for it to not be me. Um, but yeah, I got quite confused though at that point, because I think when I was a teenager viewing these things, there was less talk around non-binary identities, and it was very much kind of binary trans man. So I related so much in terms of physical gender and how I kind of held myself, how I felt my body should be and look like, mannerisms, all that kind of thing. But inside, I was like, oh, I don't feel like a man. So maybe it's not me. So then I kind of convinced myself that I wasn't trans for quite a while. Yeah, kind of went back into that denial and had myself convinced that I was quite happy. um, and then again, it was in lockdown, where I obviously did a lot of thinking, which I think there were quite a few trans babies in lockdown. So I feel like people can relate to this, where just, the time to ourselves without that societal pressure bombarding us every day. Um, I realized that I wasn't sure what pronouns people, as in I wanted people to use for me. And from there, it kind of just snowballed, where I was like, oh, I think they them pronouns probably work for me better than she her. And then, yeah, the gates kind of just opened from then. I was like, okay, yeah, I think I was right when I was 16, with the whole being trans thing. And yeah, from then on, I've kind of been sharing my journey on Instagram, been connecting with other trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming people, and particularly, like just connecting with people from the same intersections as me, because it's so hard to find rep for even just one one thing. So when you combine like being a person of color and East Asian, um, being trans and binary, and also the added kind of element of being adopted, and that's how much that's meant for my life. It was really really important for me. Like I was craving that for a long time, I think.
Mm.
So yeah, that's about my journey up till now in a kind of brief
Yeah.
whistle stop tour.
I'm very interested in you said kind of early on in that you didn't realize that you were a person of color. What was that experience of finding that out like? Like
Yeah, good
I can
question.
imagine that would be kind of like world shattering almost like
Yeah, yeah, like a
not in a bad
bombshell.
way necessarily, not in a bad way necessarily, just like learning something that intense about yourself so late
Hmm.
in life is, I mean, not so late in life, but later than a
Yeah,
lot of people realize it for
really,
sure.
I'm really, really old.
Exactly.
No, definitely, it was. It felt kind of confusing at first, and I think there were a lot of mix of emotions there. Where in some ways I was quite like angry because I feel like I should have realized sooner, and that maybe if I'd grown up with my white family being a bit more aware, a bit more connected to other people of color, or even just seeing more Asian rep in my life,
Mhm.
and that wasn't just through that kind of white lens of viewing Asian culture. I may have realized, and I think it threw up the whole kind of just realizing how much race had affected me. Because I think, and yeah, it's a common theme that I think I was in denial about how much it impacted my life, as well as
Mhm.
other things like gender and sexuality. In that I'd kind of been walking around being like, oh, I'm like kind of the same as everyone else around here, and I forget that I'm like Chinese, and I had friends that would be like, oh, I don't really see you as Chinese and all this kind of thing. And I think it did give me that sense of, yeah, being very close to whiteness, and to a certain extent I do think that has given me privileges. Um, I think I'd like to acknowledge that, but in the same sense, it doesn't negate the other life experiences that I've had, and obviously the fact that when people look at me, they see somebody that is Chinese. So that was a bit of a mind jumble at
Yeah.
first, and I think I think I struggled with it at first. I think I struggled to kind of get to grips with it and accept it, and I kind of was fighting against feeling like an imposter, really, because it's like I think, especially as a transracial adoptee, where genetically, I did a DNA test, and I'm fairly sure that I'm like 100% East Asian, or like as much as you can be. But at the same time, like my dominant culture growing up and family have been white. So I think we have this really common tendency to feel like an imposter in white spaces because we're not
Mhm.
quite white enough or British enough or whatever. But then we also feel like a massive imposter with our own culture and with people of the same race because we've not grown up with that cultural heritage being known. We've kind of been disconnected from that. Um, yeah, and that can be again just like another really big journey, and it can
Yeah.
be quite painful, I guess, to realize that that ancestral heritage that you kind of should rightly have, you've been severed from that. So
Yeah.
it's been, I mean, I'm definitely still on it, but just talking to others that have a similar experience, and even just, meeting connections from QT like queer, trans, intersex, people of color groups. I think that's been really healing in my journey.
Yeah, that's I can kind of imagine. I definitely don't have that same experience for sure.
Mhm.
I will not even try to say that I can understand it fully, but I will say something that I've noticed is lately in myself is that I've been, I grew up as a white person with a white family, and my only culture that I had was American culture, which is,
Mhm.
a couple hundred years old, and
Mhm.
and nothing deeper than that.
Mhm.
I grew up homeschooled my entire life, so I had homeschool culture, and also um, I grew up evangelical, so I had evangelical culture. Um, None of which I hold on to really anymore. None of those
Mhm.
three.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And so something that I've found is that I'm also kind of like lacking a culture, like a root, especially being a history major. Like it's really important
Mhm.
for me to know kind of like the history of my family and my lineage and where I come from, for all sorts of reasons. Like I want to know the good and the bad of what my ancestors have done, and kind of learn from that. I did a DNA test as well, and I found out I'm largely Celtic, which is really
Mhm.
cool. I'm a
Mhm.
practicing pagan at this point in my life. And so learning that I have a lot of like pagan roots was like really
Mhm.
healing to me.
Yeah.
Knowing that I've been kind of practicing these things in small ways throughout my whole life, just it felt like learning that was like coming home in a way.
Yeah.
It felt very comforting. And I wonder
Yeah.
if you have any experiences like that where you've been trying to reconnect with your East Asian culture, where it kind of feels like coming home. It's things that maybe you've done all your life, or things you're starting to do, or just learning more about, where you came from. Are there any things like that that you're kind of like have a similar experience like that?
Yeah, I do think I definitely relate to you there. I actually had a question that I'm going to ask before I forget it, which was that do you think that people are kind of drawn to religion or spiritual practices that kind of align with their genetic roots? So for you, like being pagan and Celtic kind of go hand in hand. And yeah, kind of answering your question as well now, I think I was always drawn to kind of Buddhist philosophies
Mm,
and the kind of like Taoism. And I think I've been exploring that, not super intensely, but I've been exploring that more and exploring my own kind of spirituality. And yeah, I've definitely moved away from kind of that Christian C of E kind of upbringing that I had, and definitely moved into more of a decolonized way of viewing my spirituality and being able to connect with ancestors. And I've been to this festival called the Queer Spirit Festival, and that was just like an amazing holistic kind of experience where just got to hang out doing spiritual things with fellow queer people, which I think is healing in its own right. But just
absolutely.
the sense of connection I got to the people there and like the land, but also just my roots, and I never really had that before. And I think what's interesting is I've got this pull towards East Asian culture and things like Buddhism and that kind of a little bit philosophical way of thinking. But I think what's interesting is that I also have this affinity for other cultures as well. And it's almost like perhaps it's a spiritual connection, but maybe the not knowing my roots for my whole life. has kind of, I don't know, almost like increased my connection to all of them in a weird way. Like I kept having, I actually had visions of Africa quite a lot when I was at this festival, and I was like, this is very, very interesting, because I would have
That's
no
very
idea. Like I've never been to Egypt or whatever. Yeah, and that's what kept coming to me. So I don't know if that's just that Egypt is like a representation for roots, you know, like the kind of the birthplace of humanity. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely something that I'll keep exploring, I think, for life.
Yeah, to answer your question, I've never really thought about it in regards to whether or not like our existence kind of like we're drawn to religious or spiritual practices that relate to our like ancestry. It's definitely something interesting to explore, especially because we know that like certain things like trauma are encoded in our DNA, and that's how like generational trauma kind of continues. That's like way oversimplified way of stating it, but it helps get the point across.
Uh-huh.
There are things that are encoded in our DNA, including likes and dislikes, and I think that could lean towards religion as well and spiritual practices. But then on that same coin, I think about like, well, if I had that pull to pagan roots, why wouldn't my parents? Or why don't my grandparents or their grandparents, who were all evangelical and even pastors and like so rooted in the church? And I wonder if that may be just because colonization struck really hard, and
Yeah,
who
it
knows?
tends
I
to do
mean, it's
that.
probably there's probably a lot of factors that go into it, but
Mm,
it's really interesting that to think of generations and generations of my family being so steeped in the church, and then me just being like, nah, it's not for me. Let me go back to
mhm.
braiding my hair and, you know, things like this, like that really grabbed me. And like crafting practices. And I mean, even I grew up in Appalachia, so there's something called granny magic or Appalachian magic that I really tried to explore a little bit, which was really fun. And I don't know, generations and generations had no interest in this, and I happen to be the one that's like, yeah, nature magic, let's go. And I don't
Uh-huh.
know, I don't really know how that works.
Yeah. Do you think that's related to being queer? And you know, like how they sometimes say there's like neuroqueer, and just being different in one way kind of makes us question just every
A
societal
lot.
structure out there. And then it's like we open ourselves up to, yeah, exploring our like authenticity more, and maybe, yeah, unlocking, yeah.
Absolutely. I definitely see that, especially within, because I'm also disabled. So within the disabled community, um, I have kind of this theory, and there's probably been studies on it, and there's probably actual fact behind it, but I don't know that for sure. So I'll just say it like it's my thought.
Mhm.
um, but essentially, I've seen in the disabled community that a lot of us tend to be queer. And I think it's because
Mhm.
society already sees us as different. So we
Yeah.
have nothing holding us back from like looking into what other ways are we different.
Mhm.
There's no like societal pressure to be normal because we can't be normal. As disabled people, society see us as almost inhuman already. And
Mhm.
so there's like this already pre-existing structure there that we don't have. So it's like might as well look into other things. And so I think that goes right along with it. It's like, it gives us an opportunity to explore our queer identities, our religious, spiritual identities, honestly, anything else. It gives you room to just look into things, political, especially. I think a lot of,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, people in our circles, especially, explore a lot of different political ideologies, and maybe like outside of the box ones. Like it's not just looking at like, at least in the US, it's not like, are you Republican? Are you Democrat? It's more like, are you Green Party? Are you Democrat? Are you Republican? Are you anarchist? Are you Marxist? Or like, you know, you go through everything and try to figure out what
Mhm.
you are.
Yeah.
There's so many options, and I think the world is very geared towards a binary. It's either black or
Mm,
white, and you have to be
for
one
sure.
or the other. And the great thing is we can explore being somewhere in the middle, somewhere in a gray sphere, or completely outside of that. You don't have to be black, white,
Yeah,
or gray.
for sure.
You could be in the color spectrum,
For
on the other
sure.
hand, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of have the theory, and I think many other people in the queer community and other communities have this as well, where I kind of believe that a lot of people do fall outside of the binary or the boxes and labels, and I think it's just a lot of people just haven't questioned it. But if you really got them to sit down and like scrutinize it, I think there'd be a lot less cis het people in the world, really. um, but yeah, I kind of I believe that everyone has their own gender, really, and their own kind of unique way of feeling through the world. Um, so yeah, how we meant to label those? It's just like my gender is just me, really, an extension
Exactly.
of.
I have a funny fact on that. On that note, I was just telling someone the other day, and I believe we Googled it to confirm it if I remember correctly. But essentially, the US military
Mm,
used to test chromosomes. Um, I don't really remember why. I think it was for some health thing. I should
yeah.
probably like actually verify this before like saying it as it's fact, but go do your research, people, if you want to like confirm this and make sure. But this is just how I'm remembering it, and my memory's not great, so we'll just also put that disclaimer out there. If I remember correctly, they tested chromosomes and they actually stopped doing that because people were getting answers that they didn't like,
Okay.
which I find
Because
really funny. They were finding out that
yeah.
they were all different, like intersex
Mhm,
variations,
mhm,
essentially.
yeah.
And they were like
Not happy
mad
about
about it.
this. Yeah. But this
So
isn't convenient for me right now.
so they stopped doing it. And I
Wow.
just find that really funny. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just imagine all these like military bros, just like 1900s or whatever this was, like getting their chromosome tests back, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm a real man," and then other guys just being like, "Yeah,
Mhm,
me too.
mhm.
I have those chromosomes. Yep."
Plus
I don't know.
another couple of you. Yeah.
It's just really funny to me. Yeah. So, how have all of these experiences really like shaped your work as a breathwork and somatic facilitator?
Yeah. So I think with that, I've really kind of just attracted other queer people and other adoptees, and often surprisingly, I think, because at one point I felt like I must have been like the only trans adoptee out there. But I think there's a few of us out there, and it's actually really nice to work with people that share the same intersections, because for me, it's there's that therapeutic relationship where you have to form a bond with somebody, and it has to be a safe space. And I feel like to do that is maybe better if I can understand the person from where they're coming from directly. So I think that seems to be how seems to be how it's going at the moment. And I'm fairly only recently started with my practice and everything. But yeah, so far I've been kind of not surprised, but it's been nice to have that kind of clientele coming through where
Mhm.
it's just so easy to get each other. And especially growing up in such like a cis het society, it's like so refreshing. I think maybe for both of us to have that. that going.
I love that. And for the audience who might not know, what is a breathwork and somatic facilitator? What does that mean, and what do you practice?
Yeah, so with breathwork, that one's kind of how it sounds. So we're working with the breath, but it's not so much just about learning kind of exercises. It's really learning kind of how consciously breathing can impact your physiology, your mental health, your physical health, your posture, all these things, and even going as deep as trauma. Because when you think about it, the breath is like we're doing it all the time, unconsciously, and I think it's kind of one of those things that's hidden in plain sight. But really, it's the most fundamental thing we have. Like, we can go without food for weeks, you can go without water for like a few days, but hold your breath for 7 minutes, and you're out of it. So
Yeah.
the breath is a really, really powerful tool in changing our own physiology, really. And I think what a lot of people maybe don't realize about the breath is that if we consciously change the breath, we can actually change our state. So, a lot of people can probably relate to being stressed and breathing more, or they've been, maybe they've been through an event that was traumatic for them. And thinking back, they might realize that their breath was panicked and dysregulated. But it actually works the other way around, because breathing is one of the rare things on the intersection between our conscious and our unconscious nervous system. So yeah, it's a like a beautiful tool, really, for all sorts. I got into it myself through having what I think was COVID fatigue. It was definitely post-viral fatigue. But I gave it whatever I had to other people, and they tested positive for COVID. So I'm pretty sure it was that. And I came in as a bit of a skeptic, being when someone mentioned to me, like, "Oh, have you tried breath work for energy?" And I was like, "No, I feel like I know how to breathe. Like, I've done it all my life. How much difference can it really make?" But I was kind of desperate at this point, because I tried all sorts. I'm studying nutritional therapies. I was doing all the kind of the right things, like with holistic health and functional medicine. So then I tried breath work, and I was immediately like hooked. I was like, wow, I've not had this much energy in like yonks. And from there, I kind of just kept exploring it and all the different applications, and came to it then accidentally, joined a session, not really knowing what it was. And it ended up being something called conscious connected breathing. And that's a style that we can use to basically stimulate the nervous system in a way where it can help the body process stuck energy and stuck trauma in the nervous system, in the fascia, in the subconscious. And yeah, basically our bodies know how to process this stuff. It's just a lot of the time we get in our own way, and society's taught us to kind of suppress a lot of the time. Um, so that's how I got into the breath work. And then the somatic side of it is really still breath work, because somatics is soma just means body. So it's anything that is body orientated. So somatics could be um, deep tissue massages or myofascial release. It could be dancing, just anything to do with our bodies. And as mentioned before, I'm an adoptee, and I think there's a lot of narratives flying around around adoption, and that adoption is beautiful, and that white people go and save people, like go and save babies from their cultures, and all of this stuff. But what I've learned as an adoptee through my own experience, through the community, through studying trauma, is that adoption is really fundamentally just traumatic. It's traumatizing to, I'd say, probably 99.999% of anyone's nervous systems out there. And because our trauma occurs so early on in life, it's like we feel the repercussions of it throughout our lives, through everything really. But it's not something that we can talk about and remember as such directly. So we don't have that explicit memory for it. There's only that kind of felt sense memory in the body. And I think that's what drew me into somatics so much, like using body orientated ways of processing things, because I definitely felt like a lot of my kind of issues stemmed from like that pre-verbal age, and even that transgenerational, intergenerational trauma. And I don't know what my ancestors went through, but I can probably at least guess that the person that birthed me was in a pretty stressed situation having me, seen as she had to then relinquish me. And again, I don't know the specifics, but I imagine that there's no way that wouldn't be stressful.
Yeah.
So yeah. Did that answer your question? I feel like I just rambled.
I think so, yeah.
Rambled for about 10 minutes there.
You're good. Yeah, that makes me think of another thing is like, I believe a lot in intentions on like a child. So as someone, like the reason why someone's having a child affects them. That's more of a spiritual belief than something that I think is necessarily grounded in fact. But I really do believe that like the reason why someone has a child has an effect on that child. To my knowledge, my parents intended to birth me, and um, and I know that they spoke over me a lot that I was going to be a leader, and I was going to be. I would say they probably said a servant for God, and I do believe that that had an effect, and I do believe that I don't necessarily see myself as a leader per se, but I do see the servant aspect coming through. I do feel like I have to like serve all the time. Like everything is like I feel like a duty to like always be there to do something for everyone, as much as I can. And so I wonder if before I go on too much of a tangent on that, I wonder if that has some effect in other ways as well. So like um I guess this would be all kind of just speculation at this point, but if your birth parent didn't intend to birth you, or if there was a stressful situation, there might have been some intentions there that could have affected you in different ways. Again, speculation and spiritual belief not grounded in fact, but it's kind of interesting to think about, like what intentions could have been there that maybe I don't know, stay with you and that you maybe haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, like the energy from that intention. Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting theory, and I'd never thought about that before. But yeah, thanks for sharing. Because like I'm always open to these discussions. I mean personally, I feel like we're all inherently like spiritual beings, and like everything is just energy anyway. Like
Exactly.
So,
That's actually how I told my friend about certain like pagan things that are like, oh, but like you believe like everything is energy. I'm like, have you Have you taken a physics class before, ever in your life?
Yeah, literally.
Everything is energy.
Crazy.
That's actually like that's
That's
scientific
like
facts right
scientific
there.
fact. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm a big believer that science and spirituality are really like married, or like they
Oh, yeah.
could be or should be, and that actually they're not opposing at all. They go hand in hand. But yeah, again, I think people have just got these like this binary idea of science versus spirituality, and actually, I believe that one and the same. Um, so yeah. But oh, can I touch upon so what we were just talking about with um, adoption and then gender? Because so to my knowledge, I believe I was relinquished for being a baby girl in quotation marks, for being
Mm.
assigned female at birth. Because in China at the time when I was born, the one child policy was in place. I can't remember when it came into place and when it ended. Um, but yeah, anyway, so that's kind of the best guesses that we have for kind of that timeline of events of like why I came to be where I was. And I think for a while that was really hard to process, with realizing that I was actually trans, because then there was this like painful irony that I'd been relinquished from my first family, and then been taken away from my race and my culture, and any kind of like genetic mirroring, because of my gender, when actually my gender was different. And I think people generally read me as male now. Um, so yeah, to have that knowledge that that was the likely reason. Um, it didn't mess me up, but it was a lot to kind of work through. I think at that time. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and I know that's I think quite a common experience that adoptees go through that are trans, is that you have the initial processing of a lot of grief around being relinquished and anger, um, and then you kind of go through that again because you realize that the the gender you were, at least for Chinese adoptees, a lot of us at least, the gender that you were kind of relinquished being isn't the one that you actually are. Um, so yeah, I think that's just. But yeah, I just wanted to share that as like
Yeah, that
as just the
does.
perspective of trans adoptees that we kind of often go through.
Yeah, that does definitely like tie into the theory that like intents have kind of an effect on you, regardless of whether you know those intents or not.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah. That really supports your theory.
because
Yeah,
like
they did.
if the parents were like, "Wow, we really want a boy," and
Mm,
then you're born not
yeah,
uh like physiological
yeah, yeah,
boy, and then you later transition. I
yeah.
mean,
No, that's
that kind of
crazy.
supports that in a
Yeah,
way.
and something I've noticed as well is that there were a lot of queer and trans Chinese, specifically like East Asian adoptees. And again, like this isn't something that has been studied in literature or anything. This is just an observation that I've made, and a few other people around me have made. But it's got to be disproportionate. Like 90% of the Chinese adoptees I know or like East Asian adoptees are queer and or trans.
Wow.
So yeah, maybe you should write a paper on this with your theory. Maybe this is the
I don't
scientific
know.
underpinning that we need.
I don't even know how you could prove that. You could just be like, there's a weird
Yeah,
correlation. I think
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you could definitely have a correlation paper on that. I don't know if you could like scientifically prove
No, it's probably
that
better
kind
than
of
going.
theory.
Yeah,
You
but
would
no,
have
it's
to
super,
have
super
parents
interesting.
specifically speak things on their children and then follow that family throughout their
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
lifespan to see if those things come true,
yeah,
which would
and
be
to use controls
a
as well. And
nightmare.
yeah, completely. Yeah, I'm not sure that would pass ethics as well, depending on what you're saying to them. But yeah,
Right?
yeah, that's crazy.
Very
I feel like I'm
interesting.
going to be thinking about this for a while now after this.
That's what I've loved about a lot of these interviews is that we have had so many really interesting conversations come about.
Mm.
Everybody watching, we'll have all of these also on YouTube afterwards, and you should go and watch the other ones. If you probably won't be able to stay the full 24 hours like all of us, but um, if you're coming in now and you're watching this one, but you want to hear more of the other interviews, they'll be on YouTube. You should check them out. Um, there have been a lot of really, really cool conversations so far that have really been like, what can we change in the medical field? What can we
Oh,
change in
don't get me started.
like all almost everything needs to be changed in the medical field. That's where we start. But
Literally.
like what can be changed in society? What can be changed in politics? Like all of these
Mm.
topics have been um, covered in various ways throughout the live stream. So it's really interesting to see all of the different perspectives and all the different theories coming together to just, I don't know, exist together as queer people, specifically with gender and sex experiences, is very interesting. So do you incorporate your unique identity into like and experiences into your practice, or is it more of like something that lives outside of
Mm.
your identities?
I think, you know what, I think I do, because I think kind of, I guess by and large, what I do is just, I see it as an extension of me. And I think when I'm working with people, it's kind of like I could technically not involve my identity at all and just facilitate from a very kind of not detached, but it doesn't have to be super personal. Um, but I feel like people like to be able to connect and have that kind of more personal side. And I think, you know, the fact that I'm facilitating and I have an identity means that I guess that identity must come through in some form or other, even if I wasn't talking about it. And, you know, I think the people that I attract are attracted to my energy or something about me. So, you know, I'm happy for that to come through. And I think it's important for me at least to make my practice, you know, gender inclusive and adoption, trauma informed, and you know, neurodivergent inclusive, that kind of thing. It's just I want to make it as inclusive as I can, really. You know, starting from the intersections that I have and knowing how that's made therapies or services before very inaccessible, and also just listening to other people in the community with other intersections, and learning from those. So yeah, I think it's got to come through. I think I must incorporate it.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm sure it comes through. Just from talking to you for the last little
Mhm.
bit, I can't imagine that those identities and experiences don't have effect on how you do something. So, I mean, I've never done breath workers, anything like that, but it does feel like a very personal, or it does look like how I've seen it. Looks like a very personal
Mhm.
thing to be like coached on. It's literally dealing with your body. That's the most personal part about you is your body
Mhm.
and your
Mhm.
mind, and it having such an effect on both of those things, I really can't imagine those experiences don't come through in some way, and likely in a positive way.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
And you know, we were talking about intention as well, and I think that kind of, what was I going to say? I feel like I've lost my train of thought now. But yeah, just the intention I think that the facilitator comes with to a session, it's going to impact the client or the person you're facilitating on. And I think, you know, as a queer person and as a spiritual person, I think that can really almost deepen the experience that you're able to provide to someone when you're facilitating. Because, you know, I think there are things that I have heard that you can do quite clinically, but that's definitely, I don't think I could, to be honest. I don't think I'm capable of just doing it clinically. And yeah, like we were saying before, you know, everything is just energy. Like, I feel like my energy will definitely impact them in the session. So yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. And just because I'm curious, does a client's gender identity change how you approach breathing techniques or various somatic experiences?
So not in a massive way, not in a massive way, because I think, you know, breathing, you know, I say I'm a facilitator, not a coach, because I actually have the belief that, you know, breathing is super personal and it's something that we innately, like our bodies have innate wisdom of how to breathe. But I'm basically more of a guide to help people breathe in a way that's more beneficial for them, or in a way that can help them process stuff that they've not been able to maybe process in other therapies. But in terms of perhaps like physical, like putting your own hands on your body or something, if I know someone's gender identity or their gender non-conforming, it might just change like how it might phrase things, or just that kind of awareness that maybe some people don't want to put their hands on their chest for a breathing exercise, that kind of thing. And you know, when we're talking about energy, I think a lot of people in the kind of health and wellness spaces like yoga and stuff, it can be very like gender binary, very, you know, like women breathe into your womb or something, something along those lines. And you know, obviously, like being me, I tend to stay away from that kind of very kind of blanketed gender binary statements, because you know, I think there's a lot of different ways you can talk around body parts and energy moving through different systems that doesn't have to be gendered and doesn't have to involve gendered words. So that would probably be how it impacts it the most, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like more of just like respecting the person than actually changing anything.
Yeah.
Which is really good. Um, I think a lot of people need to be more aware, and unfortunately, being more aware of those types of things typically almost requires you to have gone through those things yourself. Um, you know,
Yeah, I agree.
speaking from the perspective of a neurodivergent person, I recognize that neurotypical people just don't think the same way that I do. And I imagine that trickles into my experiences as like someone with PTSD, someone with like a gender difference. I can see why other people don't take those things about me into consideration when they react or interact with me, because they don't have those experiences. It's not something they're thinking about. But it's weird to us sometimes because it's all we think about. Because it is such an innate part of our existence, we can't stop thinking about it. It's it's everything about us. And
Yeah.
so, I can imagine that it's not extremely common to find someone who like makes those like respectful or makes those moments respectful in those ways. But I can also understand why, like
Hmm.
other people who do what you do, like if they don't make those same notices about like maybe don't put your hands on your chest, like you said. Um, yeah, things to think about for sure. Things,
Yeah, yeah. I think it's very hard to kind of teach people. Like you just can't teach lived experience, can you?
yeah,
So, and I think sometimes it's like you could have a PhD in studying some population or another, or like gender or something. But yeah, if you're a cis person, it's like how much can you? I still feel like the people with the lived experience are always like the most expert in knowing what they've gone through because they've literally gone through it. Like you can't really get more expert if that makes sense. And yeah, it's something that I I get quite impassioned about sometimes because there's I mean with kind of all intersections really, people that try and tell us what gender we are or what disability means or how people should think or what adoption is or isn't, and it's like I think we know.
yeah. I'm pretty sure we get it. A
Yeah.
good example of that, I think, would be, and I know a lot of other trans mask people that I've met have had this experience as well. When you start to, I don't like using the word pass, but for this, it actually contextually makes sense. When you start to pass as a guy, people start interacting with you very differently in that, at least what has been my experience and what I've heard from other people is that like women will start to get a little scared if you start walking behind them. You'll notice them tense up more. Um, or like you have to be mindful about how you like just approach people because
Hmm.
being a guy, you can kind of scare them sometimes if you approach them a certain way. I like to turn up the gay a lot so that it's a little less threatening if I just really want like need to talk to someone and
Hmm.
I don't want to like
Yeah.
and I don't feel like I'm a scary person. It's not about like whether or not you're actually scary. It's literally just how you're being perceived.
Yeah.
And that's something that I feel like a lot of like cis men are not really aware of all the time because they're like, oh, I'm a good person. You
Hmm.
know, it's not always about you being a good, safe person. It's the person doesn't always know that you're interacting
Hmm.
with.
Hmm.
And so I've had to tell, I have a friend, a cis man who like just walked up to this lady in PetSmart one time and just like started petting her dog like without asking. And I was like,
Hmm.
dude. And she was like visibly uncomfortable. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, can you please just walk away from her? She is not comfortable with this.
Yeah.
Please just don't interact with people like that. And he just like couldn't comprehend what I was saying. And I was like, this is
Hmm.
one of those like lived trans experiences
Yeah.
that you just like
Yeah.
you can't like tell them what they don't know. Like they won't understand.
Yeah. Yes.
I have so
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
opinions on that too.
Yeah.
It's definitely interesting. The
Mhm.
perception of people around you as you transition is very interesting, like how things change.
Yeah, that's something that I feel like I've definitely noticed. And I
Mhm,
think perhaps it's not been as pronounced as maybe places in America. Um,
mhm,
I feel like that might have been a more stark contrast.
mhm,
Um, yeah, just based off what I've heard from other people. Um, So I'm not entirely sure how much is just me being hyper aware of those kind of things, because like you were saying, that lived experience gives you that awareness that you don't like as someone read as male, you don't just kind of go up to people and just do whatever the hell you want because it could scare people. Or, you know, like just walking behind women or that kind of thing. Or
Yeah.
also just like, I guess how you, because I think before, and this is kind of something that I miss, is just being able to talk to women just anywhere and like in the toilet. Like toilets used to be such a social occasion and now they're really boring and I hate
Yeah.
that. um but yeah, it's just that there's always that in your mind that, oh, this could be perceived in the as either a threat or like the wrong way, or like they might think I'm coming on to them or something, where actually I'm just trying to, like, I'm just a friendly person. um and yeah, like I think recently I was outside my house in Cardiff, and there was like a girl playing football and stuff, and she started like talking to me and stuff. And I suddenly got like worried, like what neighbors might think of like just seeing me talking to this little girl outside her house. And I feel like that's something that I would have never had to be concerned about whilst being perceived as a woman. So yeah, it's just things like that. But I do wonder if being East Asian takes the notch down a little bit on that, because I
Mhm.
feel that people's kind of perception of East Asians is very like non-violent and non-threatening. So I don't know if that's, even though it's like it's not a privilege in terms of being a person of color, I do feel like that is slightly advantageous in that people don't view you
Mhm.
so much as a threat. And you know, there's
Yeah.
so many wrong stereotypes. Like we shouldn't be stereotyping based on race, but
Yeah.
sometimes they can, yeah, it can be slightly advantageous in the
Yeah.
Western world that we live in.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's very interesting. Hmm. I do also worry about those things. Like, for example, I used to be a camp counselor. Um, or not like a counselor. I was like a counselor in training, a CIT. And I really enjoyed camp. Camp was like one of my favorite things every summer. Even though it was Christian camp that I always went to, it was really fun. Um, or well, parts of it were fun. We'll say parts of it.
Yeah.
I just liked being around friends all the time because being homeschooled, I didn't like have that experience of like going to school with people very often. Um, that's a whole other topic, but uh, I just like being around like friends and people that I knew and just interacting with them like throughout the day
Mhm.
was just like a completely different experience for me than like my normal day-to-day life where it was just like my brother and my parents and I. So I enjoyed that part of it, but transitioning, I like somewhere in there realized, I can't be a camp counselor anymore. They're not gonna know where to put me. They're not gonna
Mhm.
know like yeah, there was just a lot of things there where I was like, what if I am like stealth and was put as like a male counselor? They play a prank on me or something and try to like pull my pants down or something. I don't know. I have like these weird theories in my head of like what could happen because boys
Yeah.
are like, especially teenage boys are really stupid
Mhm.
sometimes.
Mhm.
And I was just like, all of these horror stories about like how badly that could go if I tried.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know if that's really all that safe.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's another one of those like kind of situations that I would be like really worried about perception versus reality and how that could become dangerous for certain things. What could be placed onto me that isn't actually like true.
Yeah.
Um, Thankfully, there are actually queer camps out
Mhm.
there, and so if I ever want to do that, I technically could be a counselor at one of those camps, which would be really fun.
Yeah.
There's one here in California called Brave Trails, and I think they just started in Atlanta, Georgia as well.
Oh yeah, I think I've heard of that. I think I've heard.
Yeah.
That
So
sounds good.
maybe one day we'll see.
Yeah, for sure.
We
yeah,
are running. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh
Just
no,
finish your sentence.
I was just gonna say that I think it's quite sad, kind of being able to now view society from the lens of being perceived as male.
Mm,
Yeah, you see how even more screwed up screwed up it is, really.
that goes back into our like awareness and our intentions and just exploring our place within the world as queer people and all of those things. It's like a really nice way to wrap this up, actually. Just
Yeah.
perception changing is probably the biggest thing about all of it. It's like the biggest change out of all of them, for me at least.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for talking to me. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we should definitely talk again sometime. I have so many more questions that we just don't have time for today, but I would absolutely love it. Where can the audience find you if they want to learn more, or perhaps they want to book a session with you?
Yeah, so I'm currently about to be setting up a website and stuff. I'm currently still at uni as well, so been a bit busy for that. But I've mainly thus far been taking bookings and liaising with clients through my Instagram, which my handle is just my name. So it's at Kellan Bacon. So yeah, quite boring, but easy to remember. And yeah, from there, I'm also on TikTok a little bit, not too much, and Threads. But yeah, mainly Instagram is the place to find me. And I talk about gender and trauma and adoption and nervous system and breathwork all on one account at the moment. So yeah, just everything is collated on there.
That's great. I wish that I was able to put everything on one account. My mind just won't let me. It's got to keep certain things separate, but it would make it so much easier, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that was the internal conflict I had for quite a while, to be honest.
Yeah, then also the algorithm works against you with that, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Oh,
well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm so excited that we got to talk today. It's been great hearing from you and hearing about your experiences and specifically the perspective of a trans adoptee is really interesting and something that like somewhere in the back of my mind I knew that those two things could overlap, but I have never met someone to my knowledge where that overlapped, and I have never really thought that much about it. And so it's really cool to have that like being brought to my awareness. And I really hope that somebody in the audience watching will kind of relate to that and have representation of that because of you. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no worries. And just to mention as well, I set up a support group on Facebook specifically for trans adoptees, and we meet up every couple of months or so and just talk about being queer and adopted, basically. So if there are people that kind of got something out of hearing my perspective on that, because they can relate, just making them aware that that exists.
Definitely check it out.
Okay,
Right.
thank you again. It was great.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that you joined us, and we look forward to hearing from you
It's
again.
lovely to talk. All right, bye for now.
Bye.